Hey guys, it's Charlene. Today I'm going to share with you 3 very different cards I made using the same stamp set. So I'm using the brand new Follow the Leaves Rectangle Wreath Builder stamp set. And this is a very large stamp set. It has those 2 pieces to create a rectangle wreath, has a couple of smaller leaves in it as well as some really nice fall related sentiments. So I'm going to start out by doing some heat embossing. I've got my Altenew Stampwheel here and I'm going to stamp out with some embossing ink. That way I can come in with some gold embossing powder. So I'm making sure I got really good coverage with the embossing ink on my stamp, and then I'm just making sure to press down around on the entire stamp because it is a large stamp to make sure that that embossing ink transfers really well. Next, I'm coming in with some gold embossing powder, but you could use any color of embossing powder to do this technique. You could use clear, you could use silver, whatever you have. It doesn't have to be gold. I just thought that gold would go really well with the autumn sort of warm, fuzzy feeling you get, as well as the colors that I'm going to be using today. So now I'm lining up the other half of the rectangle wreath, and I'm just making sure that it lines up along the bottom with the other image as it's stamped. So this is fairly easy to do. You just want to make sure that the tiniest little bit of the image that you've stamped is showing on the lines for the new part of the stamp that you're using to finish everything off. I'm also going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. I'm using the large sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm just placing it in there in between the 2 wreath building pieces. You can see that this creates a really large finished piece. So you could use this for all kinds of different sized cards if you stamp out the entire wreath. It doesn't have to be an A2 size card like I'm making. You could use this to make a 5x7. You'll see I do make a mini slimline later with a different way that I've used the stamp, but you could make a mini slimline with this outline as well. You could cut this down and use just part of it on an A2 size card. Lots of different options with this wreath building stamp because it is so large. So I went in again with the anti-static powder tool as well as my embossing ink, making sure to get that really nice coverage again. And then once again, I am coming back in with the gold embossing powder. Now, I recommend doing each half of the stamp in the embossing powder and not trying to stamp it all at once and then do all the heat embossing. And the reason is because you need to be able to see where the lines end on the end of the left half of the wreath, so that way you can line it up with the right half of the wreath. I'm using 110-pound paper here. I'm using a thicker paper, and that's because I'm going to be using a water technique here. Now, it's not watercolor cardstock, it is just regular cardstock, and that's because I'm not going to be using any brushes, so I won't have to worry about the paper pilling on the cardstock. If you are going to use brushes, I do recommend using some type of watercolor paper. So once I've got all of my heat embossing nice and melted, I'm going to come in with a couple of colors. I'm going to be using a red, a yellow, and an orange, and I'm going to be using my rainbow paper pouncers here. This is a very, very easy technique. This is a very quick and easy card to make, but the results are really beautiful. So all I'm doing is pouncing the ink onto the edges of the cardstock along where that leaf frame goes, and I'm doing the colors kind of in different areas. I'm not worried about blending here because the pouncers are going to make it so that the colors kind of seamlessly blend into each other, and then I'm not worried about the lines or the edges of where the color ends because the water that we're going to add to the cardstock, it's going to give it a very seamless, beautiful finish. So I've done some red in the top right corner the bottom right corner and the bottom left corner, and I'm just making sure to get a really good amount of ink down on the cardstock, because when you add the water, the ink is going to fade back a little bit, and we want to make sure that it's still very nice and vibrant. So now I've brought in my orange ink, and these are all water-based dye inks that I'm using for this technique. You don't want to use pigment inks unless they are a water reactive pigment ink, because the water is really what's going to make that ink move around and give it a really interesting, beautiful look. So you can see I've brought the orange ink in on the top left corner, blended some in with the red ink, and then also on the side blended some in with the red ink. Now I've got my yellow, and I'm going to do a lot more blending with the yellow because yellow and red make orange. So pretty much anywhere that I touch the yellow to where the red ink is, it's going to create orange. So that's also why I didn't put too much orange down when I was going in and adding the orange ink. But you can see I'm just going along all the different spots where I don't have any ink yet. And I'm kind of doing a pounce and roll method here. So I'm pouncing the ink down and then rolling my pouncer. So now I've got my mister here, and I'm gonna pretty much drench this piece, get it nice and wet. I'm going to take it out of my splat box that I have there and let it dry. And you can see now that it's completely dry. You have this beautiful watercolor look where the inks have mixed together. They've sort of started creeping in towards the center of the card, but they fade out really beautifully. It looks very nice. I added a few sequins from the A Classic Christmas Sequin Mix Plus. And then I can come in here with my Picket Studios stamp scrubber and clean my entire stamp with some water, just making sure that it gets down in all of those little nooks and crannies. The scrubber is really helpful for that. For my second card, I'm using just 1/2 of the leaf frame. So I'm making a slimline card, and I'm going to be using the same colors, but for this technique, I'm applying the inks directly to my stamp using my Paper Pouncer. What this is going to accomplish is that it's going to give me a seamless blend on the stamp. If you've ever tried this technique by using your ink cubes directly on your stamp, you know that it tends to leave kind of distinctive lines, and you can use your blending brushes to sort of pounce over those edges, but using your paper pouncers makes this process so easy. So what I did is I stamped down in the red, and then I'm coming in here with the orange paper pouncer, just making sure the ink somewhat overlaps where that red was. And then next I can come in with my yellow using my yellow paper pouncer. You can use as much or as little ink as you would like. So if you want a really dark, bold color combination here, you can do multiple stampings with your colors. If you want it to be a little bit lighter, you just do fewer stampings. It's completely up to you, and it largely depends on the vibe that you're kind of wanting your card to have. So I wanted mine to be a little bit more bold with the colors, so I've done a few double stampings. You can see I brought more red in, and now I'm going to come in and bring in some more yellow. I really just wanted those colors to pop off of the card. Once I'm happy with my colors, I'm going to actually rotate the stamp 180 degrees. And so now I'm going to be stamping the same exact stamp, but I'm stamping it up towards the left-hand corner of the card, the top left-hand corner. So this can be done with either side of the leaf builder stamp. If you wanted to use the left-hand side of the frame, you could do this, or you could use the right-hand side of the frame. And you can see now the areas that were red on the right-hand side of the card that I stamped Now they're set just a little bit farther down on this left-hand side of the card, and they kind of tuck in right in with those other existing leaves. It is so pretty. And this is perfect for a mini slimline card or for a full-size slimline card. This technique would look gorgeous on either of these. And now, of course, you absolutely could stamp in black ink and do Copic coloring or watercoloring or any other kind of technique that you want to use, different kinds of mediums, whatever you have, water brush markers. I just wanted to show you today some pretty quick and easy cards and show you how you can get a lot out of just this one stamp set. So I'm coming in, doing some double stamping here and there just so I can make sure that those colors are really nice and vibrant and get everything to how I like it before I move on with the next step. I'm going to cut down my card panel using the mini slimline double stitched rectangles. I love these for mini slimline cards. And then I'm going to stamp out my sentiment. This is a smaller sentiment from the set, and I'm going to stamp it out with some embossing ink and heat emboss this in white on some black cardstock. I really enjoy the look of white heat embossing on black cardstock. It really just makes everything pop. So I wanted to share that with you today when I was making the cards. A few tips if you struggle at all with white embossing powder, you could try stamping out with white pigment ink. I know that's successful for a lot of people. My biggest tip for you is just to make sure that your embossing ink pad is really nice and juicy. So if you need to re-ink it, you should do that because you want to make sure you get that sticky ink onto your cardstock really well before you put on that embossing powder. So I've cut it down into a strip and added a little fishtail, and now I'm coming in with the same sequins from a classic Christmas sequin mix plus. This mix is really pretty. It has golds and silvers and some iridescent clear sequins. So it's not just for Christmas, it's perfect for all year long in my opinion. For my third card, I'm going to be using the 2 leaf stamps that are included in the set. I'm starting with the larger of the 2, and I'm going to create a wreath with these. So now I'm using my stamp wheel, which makes it really easy, but you could freehand this as well. The leaves are kind of whimsical enough that I think freehanding a wreath with them would work really well. But I'm just going along with my stamp wheel and I'm putting 2 notches in between each leaf. And I'm using the black hybrid ink from Picket Studio because I'm going to be doing some alcohol marker coloring with these. The black hybrid ink is great pretty much for any medium that you're going to be using. You could use it for alcohol markers, watercolors, whatever you have. Now for my second portion, I'm coming in with the smaller of the 2 leaves, and I'm just going to set those out a little bit farther from the first stamp wreath, and I'm going to set them in between the 2 large stamps. So I've gone all the way around with that as well. And lastly, I'm going to stamp out my sentiment. This is one of the medium-sized sentiments from the set, very pretty. The leaves are falling. I thought that would go really well with the leaf stamps. For my alcohol ink coloring, I'm doing really simple combinations here. On the large leaves, I'm using R27 for my red and YR15 for my orange, and I'm just blending them in together. For each of those large leaves, I'm coloring the right hand side with the red, and then I'm coloring the left hand side with the orange, and just making sure to flick the color into the red so that I get a nice blend. For the smaller leaves, I've changed up the color a little bit. I am using R37 for my red, which is a little bit more of a maroon tone of a red. And then I'm using YR16 for my orange. But same concept, I'm putting the red on the right, the orange on the left, and then I'm just blending those 2 together. To create a little bit more interest on this card, I'm using some yellow, orange, and red ink, and I'm just splattering the colors across the background on the diagonal, each of the 3 colors, and that just kind of fills in that white space so it doesn't look so stark. It just adds that little bit of color to sort of tie everything together. Now, like I said, for the leaves, just like with the other card, you could use any medium you would like here. You could watercolor the leaves, you could use colored pencils on them, whatever you have. You could do them in all different colors, which I think would really be pretty as well. You could bring in some greens and oranges, yellows, reds, even some purples, and it would look really beautiful. I've come back in again with the A Classic Christmas Sequin Mix Plus, and I've added a few sequins. So here are those 3 cards again. I hope you guys picked up some tips and tricks today and enjoyed watching me make these cards. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so that you'll be aware of future tutorials here on the Picket Studios YouTube channel. Have a great day.